Good evening. I'm Bertrand Buchwalter. I'm the director of the Institut Français du Royaume-Uni, and I am delighted to welcome you online. March is the month of Francophonie, and it's a moment when we celebrate the French language and the diversity of French-speaking cultures throughout the world. It's also a moment when we reaffirm our commitment to multilingualism and to the vital importance of languages in our modern societies. Languages are indeed an asset that creates a lot of opportunities, that opens new doors, and that allows for a richer understanding of the world. We believe that access to learning another language should be a priority for all children. It's part and parcel of a global education. More decisively, I feel myself that when you speak another language, you're like another person. You know the famous quote of Arthur Rimbaud, "Je est un autre," I am another person. When you speak another language, you feel like you're another person. And indeed, accessing to a foreign language, to another language, helps you to discover new facets of your own personality. Tonight we'll have an amazing debate, and I'm very grateful to all our speakers that made time to join us and to share their perspective and to share their experiences. And I'm also very grateful to Bernadette Holmes, the director of Speak to the Future, Campaign for Languages, who, together with my team, together with Lucia and together with Benoit, put together a wonderful panel. And without further ado, I'm giving the floor to Bernadette, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bertrand. Good evening, everybody. You're joining us this evening at an historical moment in our world's history. Every country at different stages is now trying to connect, to recover from the pandemic. And our subject for this evening's roundtable could not be more relevant than it is at this moment. Languages, the importance of languages, especially important for the United Kingdom at this particular moment in its development. It's curious, isn't it? As Bertrand says, we live in a world that is culturally diverse, that speaks many different languages. And yet for English speakers, they are only too ready to slip into that comfort zone of English is enough. And we've seen the consequences of that in the United Kingdom, with falling numbers of students choosing to study languages in schools and universities, mixed messages from employers, the absence of languages and cultural awareness in policy decisions at local level and at national level. And of course, what is the end result? Significant skills gaps. Just how far is the UK out of kilter with other member states of the European Union? Okay, we're no longer a member of the European Union, but in 2016 we were. And if we look at the figures available from the data collected at that time, in 2016, we can see some very interesting figures. For the working population, so those people aged between 25 and 64, reporting that they knew more than one foreign language in addition to their mother tongue, the UK figures were 34.6%. So that's roughly just over 3 out of 10 individuals in the working population. Not bad, maybe. We might think that, for a country that has a world language. But let's compare with the 2 other countries in the member states who have world languages. What about Spain? Well, the figures for Spain were 54.3% of the working population reporting that they knew more than one foreign language in addition to their own. And for France, 60.1%. The EU average of the then 28 member states, 64.6%. Of the working population reporting that they could speak more than one foreign language. You might think Germany, for example, it's not a world language, but certainly a language which is certainly important across Europe, in Russia and Turkey. How did they fare? Well, they came in with a resounding 78.7% of the working population, with additional languages to German. Remember also that those additional languages for other member states probably include English. So not so smart and prepared, are we? Does it really matter? Well, yes, it does. Because we not only have the consequences of the pandemic, we also face the challenge of life after Brexit. I'm joined by a distinguished panel this evening who will address 4 very key questions among many other questions that they will be raising. The questions that we want to put onto our agenda are: how can the UK revive and reshape its international relations post-Brexit and post-pandemic? Is there a role for languages there? How do we support businesses to trade with non-English speaking markets? How do we fill the skills gap? Significant, not just in languages. And how can we develop the talents, the attributes that are needed by our young people to face the challenges ahead? Time to introduce our panel. I'm delighted to welcome Baroness Cousins, Jean Cousins, who is a crossbench life peer and co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Modern Languages in the House of Lords. You will, I'm sure, recognise Lady Cousins because she is a formidable champion for modern languages. Her political interests include international relations, Latin America, equal opportunities, and corporate responsibility. She is also Vice President of the Chartered Institute of Linguists. Our second member of the panel is Dr. Adam Marshall, who is Director of the British Chambers of Commerce. Adam has built up the organisation's profile since he has been Director General and its global footprint. He has campaigned his interests throughout the Brexit process, COVID-19 pandemic. Adam is Vice Chair of the World Chambers Federation and a Director Trustee of the Industry and Parliament Trust. Our third panellist, Professor Janice Carruthers. Janice is a Professor of French linguistics at Queen's and Priority Area Leadership Fellow in Modern Languages with the Arts and Humanities Research Council. Janice's fellowship involves major funded projects on language policy. Very active in this, and she has co-directed and co-organised policy workshops and has been a central author, a member of the core authorship team of Towards a National Languages Strategy in the UK, which was published in 2020. And last but by no means least, Dr. Charles Ebikeme. Now, Charles is Policy Officer in the Department for Health Policy in the London School of Economics. He works very much at the intersection of research and policy, crucial in these times. His role as policy officer focuses on fostering evidence-informed policy for health across Africa. You may well be familiar with Charles's work. He's a published author, often a Guardian and other outlets. Welcome to our panel. Lady Cousins, Jean, could I ask you please start our discussion for this evening on the subject of the importance for the future of the UK.
Thank you, Bernadette, and good evening, everybody. Well, the trouble with languages, for us Brits anyway, is that they are relevant and needed everywhere, from diplomacy to defence, from the courts to community relations, from the health service to the Home Office, from business to border traffic. But no one, by which I mean no one government department, has really got a holistic or strategic grip on how to acknowledge and act on this. Languages have traditionally been assumed to be the concern of the education system, and yet, as we've heard, take-up is low, universities are closing down language degree courses, and the recent white paper on skills and technical education is silent on the need for language skills. And that silence is quite deafening across government. There was no mention at all of languages, either in the industrial strategy or the export strategy. And I hope we'll hear more about how short-sighted that is from Adam later. No wonder the all-party group has used words like disaster and crisis to describe the languages deficit in the UK and called for a national languages recovery programme which would draw together the action needed across government, education, business and the community in a properly resourced and accountable way. And in the last year, COVID plus Brexit have together exposed our need for language skills in the UK as never before. On the upside, I must say though, it's only fair to pay tribute to the diplomatic and security services, the armed forces and the police, for the way in which they do understand the importance of language skills and deliver the training and reward achievement. If for nothing other than out of enlightened self-interest, this attitude needs to be replicated and coordinated across all sectors. The myths that everyone speaks English, or that learning another language is too difficult, or that we don't need French anymore after Brexit, or that we can rely on Google Translate anyway, all these myths must be thoroughly trashed, and I hope we'll be doing plenty of that this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we pass to Adam, please?
Good evening, Bernadette. Thank you. And I agree very wholeheartedly with Jean that we need to get language very much back into the core of the debate here in the UK. I'm a bit of an odd fish, personally, in the world of UK business. I'm one of a very small number of people who campaign regularly for a stronger focus on languages as part of the UK's future success and prosperity. I believe they are indeed fundamental to our chances of making global Britain a global and sustained success story. We have limited time for these opening remarks, so if I may, I just wanted to leave you with 3 short provocations. The first is, this really isn't about languages per se. This is about cultural competence and a globally literate workforce. Language learning is a great route to that cultural competence and that global literacy that businesses need and countries need in order to succeed. My second provocation, which I'm sure some of my academic colleagues may respond to, is it's time for us to stop obsessing about numbers of qualifications or language purely as an academic subject and start thinking about it more as a core social and work skill for people of all ages. They really go in the category for me of soft and life skills, the things that you need in order to succeed in the world. And that for me can be measured in a lot of different ways, not just by GCSEs and A-levels. My third provocation is that the global Britain ambition that we have can only be realized, whether in trade, in investment, or indeed in outlook, with a population that can communicate globally. And languages, of course, sit right at the heart of that. So I look forward to a discussion this evening where, yes, we decry the silence of our government's strategies on languages and cultural competence, but where we also leave behind some of the talk about A-levels in university departments or the achievement of perfect competence in language and shift the dial to talk more about a society where everyone has a go at language learning and intercultural understanding, and through that succeeds socially, culturally, and economically.
The challenge has been set down. Janice, would you like to respond from the voice of education?
Thank you very much, Bernadette. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation. As has been said, we know that uptake of languages in the education system in schools and in universities has been in decline for many years. But I would actually like to start this evening by noting that there are reasons to be positive. And some of these have to do with the numbers. In terms of school level qualifications, Numbers in Spanish at GCSE and A-level have increased in the last 2 years, albeit with some regional variation. French numbers were up at GCSE in 2019 and 20, particularly in England, and German numbers increased in 2020 at both GCSE and A-level in Northern Ireland. Welsh entries are up at GCSE, both as a first and a second language. And at university level, while numbers of degree students are indeed falling, the uptake on institution-wide language programmes, which are open to students of all disciplines and target very much the life skills that Adam was talking about, have been thriving. There's also much for the various UK jurisdictions to learn from each other in terms of policy. The Scottish Government has had a clear 1+2 policy for many years, with demonstrable successes at both primary and secondary level. That said, there are undeniably serious long-term issues. And it's clear that the broad languages community, teachers, researchers, and stakeholders in many sectors right across the UK, together with our cultural partners, must collaborate to bring about sustainable change. There's no one solution, but recent research and consultation right across the UK tells us that the following actions are going to be critical. One is a recognition by government of the role that languages can play in helping to build global trade and international relations post-Brexit and post-pandemic. And in addition to embedding languages in strategy documents, as Baroness Cousins has mentioned, this requires clear messaging to young people who are making choices at school. Second, increasing public awareness of the value of languages, the normality of multilingualism around the world, and its presence through community and Indigenous languages in our own society and workforce. This is all the more important given the social divide that is evident in all the data on language learning in the UK. Third, we need a flow of high quality information to careers teachers so that talented linguists can see the breadth of opportunities open to them. Fourth, any revisions to language education policy and assessment systems around the UK need to be evidence-based and fit for purpose, capitalising on what can be shown to be working well while addressing issues raised by practitioners and researchers. And above all, assessment must be fair and transparent. Removing fully the barrier of severe grading is vital, and this is an area where much progress has been made, but more is needed. And finally, higher education must continue to renew and revitalise its curriculum offer, creating programmes that are both sustainable and innovative, as well as working with schools to attract students from diverse backgrounds, both academically and socially, into languages. International study and work placements will, of course, continue to be crucial for the future of language learning in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janice. Charles, your views on this, the role of languages, particularly for the UK.
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're viewing this from. So not being a linguist, not working in education, working firmly in sort of the scientific field, I can only really give you my perspective on how, even far from the sort of nuts and bolts of languages, how language is very, very important for the work I do. So I think we all understand and all sort of agree that languages really pertain to culture. And this culture is quite important when you look to different societies and how those values are expressed through the institutions such as healthcare, education, families, rule of law. So whenever, for example, I deal in the health sector, and whenever you can see very clearly through health how these different cultures perceive health in their society. And the consequences of this, I think we're all living through now with COVID. So I'm going to give a little bit of an example of around COVID and how really language and culture is really needed to communicate risk in order to save lives. So this last week was the 1-year anniversary when the WHO, the World Health Organization, characterized COVID-19 as a pandemic. So I choose my words carefully because obviously they characterized it as a pandemic. In actual fact, the word pandemic at this level to World Health Organization, to countries dealing with health on this international scale is quite meaningless. It was actually on the 31st of January where the WHO declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. But it's only until they used this word, this term pandemic, that people actually started to take notice, or some countries actually started to take notice. This is sort of this quick example of how trying to find the right language to communicate risk, you really have to sort of meet the people who you're trying to communicate where really they are. And I think we've seen many different examples over 2020 of how this is the case. I mean, we didn't really talk about social distancing until last year. And even the term social distancing isn't quite rooted in the sort of public health advice. A lot of people at WHO talk of recommend physical distancing, not social distancing, because we realize that obviously staying socially connected is very important for mental health and social cohesion. So so we've struggled to try and find the right language and the right words. And on a global level, sometimes, for example, in some languages in African countries, do we have the word for mask? Do we have the right words and concepts for hand washing? So how do we communicate these risks? And so this sort of plays into how if you don't have this appreciation of language, this appreciation of different cultures, you can really sort of come up to these barriers when you need to sort of communicate those risks, but also when you start to work in the other direction, when you have to sort of bring people together and communicate ideas and to build visions of the future. So when we're talking about climate change, what does it actually mean when we look outside the science, and how do we make sure these things are done in equitable ways? So for me, languages really are sort of the gateway towards culture and the gateway towards building bridges towards different types of communities. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hans. This is absolutely at the heart of it, isn't it? Languages connecting to cultures, cultures connecting to ideas, ideas bringing about change, collaboration. Excellent. I'm going to open to the whole panel now, if I may, but I'm going to direct questions to individual panelists to start off with. Coming towards you first, please. Plainly, as we face the post-Brexit environment, there is going to be a reset. The UK has to reset. What are you perceiving to be the priorities, particularly in relation to languages and cultures? Are businesses calling for more languages and language skills, cultural training? What are they calling for?
Well, Bernadette, British Chambers of Commerce members over the past few years have demonstrated through survey after survey that language and the cultural competence that it brings are attributes that people seek in hiring and in finding new employees for their businesses. And of course, that's particularly important for those businesses operating in a number of different markets. And what we know is that when a business internationalizes, it doesn't generally tend to go only into a single market, but indeed to branch out into multiple markets. And for that reason, language competence and the other skills that it brings with it become more and more important. So the demand is definitely there for cultural competence and an internationally capable workforce. If you look at where the UK has been weak in trade, but where there's a real opportunity, one example would be Latin America and the urgent need for the UK to strengthen its ability to work in the Spanish and Portuguese speaking countries of the region. We are admired there, our business people are admired there, our business culture is admired there, and partially due to our language issues, we don't have the level of penetration that we would like to see in that part of the world. That's one example. Another, if you look at the UK's trade agenda, is the government is very keen on joining the comprehensive Pacific Trade Partnership Agreement, which takes in a number of countries across the Pacific Rim. And their languages spoken in East Asia become extraordinarily important too. Same with Arabic and the markets of the Gulf, North Africa, and many other places besides. These are all parts of the world where global Britain is seen as a respected country and one where people wish to intensify trade. Language can be a great vehicle and a great tool to help us to achieve that.
So a wider range of languages, access to different types of training across the lifespan. Is that what we're calling for, would you say?
Absolutely. And one of the reasons...
Too narrow?
No, absolutely. And one of the reasons why I am not so keen on focusing on A-levels or university entrance, for example, although I know that they are important measures in understanding the overall health of what we do in language, is increasing the amount of bite-sized language learning that people do, increasing the number of business-focused language courses that people do to increase cultural awareness and understanding when they go into those markets. Bite size can lead to much bigger benefits, actually, and I think we underestimate it at our peril.
I can see Janice nodding. Can I ask you, Janice, for your response to this, representing the education sphere? Sorry, you're muted at the moment.
I think one of the areas that's going to be particularly important is giving students from all backgrounds opportunities, not just having progressed through the education system through A-level and into university, but the opportunity to take new languages at university. Adam mentioned, for example, the South American market. Increasingly, universities are offering Spanish and Portuguese from beginners. In fact, they're quite well established as beginners languages, and lots of other languages can now be taken from beginners level, such that, you know, those who haven't necessarily come up through a standard GCSE and A-level route can actually take a language from scratch. And that certainly applies to languages such as Arabic, Chinese, and many others. So I think that's important. And I think also that the institution-wide programs, which are for students who are not taking language degrees, are extremely important. So if you're a science student or a medical student or a student of any discipline, you can actually take a language from any level, be it scratch or picking it up at where you left off at GCSE or A-level or whatever. So we need to keep those opportunities open as well as the sort of standard routes.
Yes, absolutely. Jean, I think you wanted to respond or comment on that.
Thank you, Bernadette. Yeah, I agree absolutely with Adam that we don't just need specialist linguists, we need people that have a general facility with a bit of another language here or another language there. But my challenge to Adam would be that I think employers need to do much more to put their money where their mouth is and make it very clear and very vocal that that you do value people with language skills, whatever their actual job is. They don't have to be employed as a linguist, but if they can work as an economist or a chemist or a journalist or whatever, and they can work in another language, you must make that clear in recruitment, in pay, because last week in the House of Lords, I was asking a minister a question about why they had slashed the teacher training bursaries for modern language students from 26,000 a year right down to 10, the only shortage subject to suffer that kind of cut. All the STEM subjects still get the bigger amount. And the answer I got from the minister was, people doing the STEM subjects could get better pay if they worked in the private sector outside teaching, whereas, you know, we know the modern language people couldn't. So I think there's a big onus on employers to try and change that balance and make sure that people with language skills, whether they're linguists or not, get rewarded and paid properly, and that their skills are acknowledged through that pay.
Adam, did you want to respond to that? I think some things also that government can do to encourage business to be able to give that sort of support, isn't there? I think we might want to develop that, Adam.
Yes, I do think that businesses can do more. What I would like to see is governments putting language back at the heart of education. I think all of us on the panel want to see that tonight. And yes, Jean, I would like to see businesses investing more in languages, but I think it's going to require some incentives. We have to help them on two fronts. One is the so what factor. What do they gain from putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak, on language learning? And on the other side, you know, how will governments help them with the sorts of, as I was saying before, bite-sized programs that could help them get their employees to a certain level of competence. But the third angle of this triangle, so government in one corner, business in another, the third one, of course, is broader society itself. We need to get broader society to put a higher level of value on language competence as a core personal skill. So yes, there's work for employers to do, but we got to get the framework right, and we've got to get people in the street to value language as a core competence too.
Agreed.
Yes, Janice, I'd like to bring you in, please, on, if I may. This whole question of social change, the different mindset that we need, and the value that we place or not in broader society about languages. What can we do to change these perceptions that English is enough and that languages don't matter? And also, how can we also address this question of inequity? So often, it's the young people who come from the most underprivileged backgrounds, most disadvantaged backgrounds, that have the opportunity, skills that would better life in professional circles. Janice.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Bernadette. There is a lot of evidence that there is a very serious social divide in the uptake of languages. That can manifest itself in the form of an independent versus state school divide. Where I live in Northern Ireland, it's a selective versus non-selective divide. The evidence is very strong indeed. Part of it is around access to language learning, the range, breadth, the time spent on languages in different types of schools. But part of it, which I think is equally important, is encouraging young people to see themselves in the future as citizens who are internationally mobile, who have what Adam was calling cultural literacy, intercultural literacy, who can work in different parts of the world, who can travel. And I think sometimes young people, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds, cannot see themselves in those roles, and therefore perceive languages as not relevant to them. So there is an enormous job of work to be done there. What I would say also is that a number of universities right across the UK have been involved in ambassador and mentoring programs. And a key part of those programs, so this is collaboration between undergraduates and school pupils, and a key part of that has been not just to help them with their language skills, but also to help the young people see themselves as employees of the future, who will travel, who will be internationally mobile, and who will need that cultural competence when they live and work abroad, because we have to solve that problem as well.
Thank you, Janice. Could I come to you on this matter, because you are clearly an ambassador in so many ways, because you are a scientist who also happens to be very fluent in French, two extremely important world languages. How do we start to make this a normal expectation, people, would you say?
So I think this goes back to what the Baroness was talking about as well. I would sort of say people with STEM backgrounds need languages a lot, because there is an expectation, particularly with STEM and science, that you now need to communicate your science. You now need to do that little bit extra work to make sure your science is relevant to a global community. And certainly we need to break down the barriers between, so for example, when I did my GCSEs, all of a sudden now you have to choose between sort of the arts type subjects and then the scientific side subjects. So there was not this opportunity to continue with both the long duration of your sort of scholarly career, but certainly breaking down those barriers and having, I think, as everyone said, having language is much more of a mainstream part of your not just scholarly life, but career. I had the opportunity to work in France, so that's why I became fluent in French, because I had no choice. But definitely, I was always good at French, so I would have still continued with it if I had that sort of support. So definitely, I agree with the other panelists that a lot of work now needs to be done to bring all these things more closer together.
Yes, to make it normal. We're receiving. Sorry, can you hear me? We're receiving questions from the audience, and one of those is: do we believe UK students' limited of English is acting as a deterrent to learning other languages? Has everybody heard me? Is that okay? Did I take that question again? Do you think that the UK students' limited grasp of English is acting as a deterrent to learning other languages? Janice, would you like to start on that one?
Well, I think perhaps it's a little bit harsh to say that UK students have a limited grasp of English. I think there's a massive spectrum there. But what I would say is that there is plenty of evidence that learning foreign languages, or indeed learning one of the indigenous languages of the UK, is actually a help in literacy in your own language. We know that there isn't a competition here between English and other languages, that literacy through learning other languages is beneficial to pupils at every age, from the beginning of primary school right through the educational spectrum. So I don't think it would be fair to cast UK students as students who've poor grasp of English, but I do see that the literacy in foreign languages and literacy in English are connected. So there are mutual benefits to be had there.
Yes, absolutely. Charles, I'm coming back to you. We talked a little in relation for this evening's roundtable about the nuts and bolts of language being one part of it. In fact, the connections to culture being so much more important. You had ideas there about translating and interpreting documents is one, but to actually implement change is something far deeper. If you could develop that idea with us.
So, the work I do mainly involves synthesizing a lot of knowledge and evidence. So every country is quite different. They have a different health system. But certainly the sort of best practices and lessons learned from one country can be useful for other countries to learn from. So obviously there is this sort of, on one level, you translate it into the other language. But I think culture and context play a really, really significant part. In the UK, we talk about nurses and doctors. Some other countries, we talk about community health workers. So, and there's a distinction there that it isn't sort of apparent at the first glance if you're going to do that translation. So it's very, very important that that context, that culture comes through, and it's only through sort of long, arduous working relationships that are built off over time between countries and between different types of researchers, between different types of stakeholders, that these things really come to the surface. And it's really through that things really progress.
Thank you. It's this idea, isn't it, of developing other skills as languages as a proxy to other developments of different competencies. And I'm coming back to you. We talk about this global literacy and the global literate workforce. What are we actually looking for? What do we mean by this global literacy within the workforce? Have we got it within our UK workforce?
Well, I don't think we have enough of it at the moment. I think we can say that, and I think all of us as panelists would probably agree on that. Many of the most globally literate individuals that we have in the UK workforce right now are immigrants themselves to the United Kingdom, or children of immigrants in the United Kingdom. That's because these individuals have a significant amount of cross-cultural experience sometimes. It also is because they often have languages as well at their disposal. We don't make enough of that contingent, and it is a very large contingent within the UK population. I think we could do more with it. But we don't want global literacy and understanding to be the preserve of a few or an elite in our workforce. We want it to be something that extends to all. So what can we do? I know colleagues in the All-Party Group and elsewhere have advocated for getting language learning into classrooms as early as possible and continuing it in a sustained way for as long as possible throughout the life of a young person in this country. And I don't think it should matter whether you're in a state educational environment in a deprived area of the country or a private institution in a wealthy area of the country. We want to see some equality of opportunity to that early exposure to language and to language learning. And we also want to see exposure to different cultures from a young age as well, because that in turn creates the building blocks that then many businesses say that they can build on. Because what they'll say is, I'll teach you the technical knowledge that you need to succeed in my business, but what I need is for you to have great teamwork skills, great communication skills, and that core cultural understanding that comes with it to operate in a diverse work environment.
Absolutely. So the international experience is necessary, is something which we do need to ensure reaches every child where they are in the country and their background. I'm going to come back to Lady Cousins. Erasmus, you know I'm going to raise this. What are we looking for in the replacement scheme, the Turing scheme? What do we want to see the government deliver on this new alternative scheme?
Well, Adam is completely right, of course. It's not just languages as a sort of academic study of grammar that's a good idea. For some, of course it is, but it's that international mindset and intercultural understanding that is so valuable, exciting, and employable. And I think that it's going to be a very tough act to follow with the Turing scheme to match up to what Erasmus offered. And Erasmus, of course, wasn't a scheme just for the people doing languages at university. It was a scheme open to everybody. And we know that it paid off because that third year abroad that the Erasmus students had, which hopefully a lot of Turing people will get as well, has meant that they are 23% less likely to be unemployed. Employers like to employ people with who've had international experience, who can work across cultures. And so I'm very worried that the Turing scheme is not going to match up, partly because the funding has only been allocated for 1 year and the government have said it will be renewed year. That doesn't sound very secure to me. But mainly because it's not a reciprocal scheme like the Erasmus scheme was. It's only going to fund outward mobility, but part of the benefit to the UK and to languages from Erasmus, we funded incoming people as well. And the Erasmus scheme was part of the supply for modern language to our school. And that teachers in the States have been EU nationals up to now. And it's going to be touch and go whether we can still carry on recruiting them, although the government did make a huge concession recently by adding MFL teachers to what's called the shortage occupations list. So it ought to continue to be easy or relatively easy for schools to continue to recruit language teachers from the EU and indeed elsewhere. So that's one good thing, but I think that Turing has got a hard act to follow. And of course, with the COVID dimension on top of that and the uncertainty about travel, its benefits may not kick in very quickly.
Thank you. Janice, did you want to add anything about the importance of Indians and the demise of Erasmus Plus?
Well, simply to say
I'm
that
thinking particularly about the third year abroad.
Yes, I mean, I would echo everything that Baroness Cousins has said. I think reciprocity is key to this, not only for the reasons that she has outlined so clearly, but also because this is about partnership. It's about two-way exchanges. And in order for us to be able to make the new scheme work for our undergraduates, we want to be able to attract partners elsewhere in the world, and there has to be something in it for them too. So, you know, that seems to me to be the big question that we're going to have to try to address, because of course it's not built into the Turing scheme, and it's fundamental to really the smooth running of what we had in Erasmus.
Absolutely. I'd like to pull in again this whole question, this whole challenge, wholesale social change. How we encourage people to think that multilingualism is normal. We are not actually a monolingual country or even monocultural country. I didn't think we were. We encourage people to feel that it's perfectly normal to listen, to have smatterings of other languages, as well as deep and more advanced competence in a range of languages, in addition to sector skills. Not suggesting that everybody becomes a specialist linguist. Just reading something here from one of our audience, thank you for in these questions, everybody. The BBC played a role, not subtitling, but dubbing. Oh, I beg your pardon, not dubbing, but subtitling. I beg your pardon, just read that again. So not the dubbing that we have on the BBC, but subtitling, so that we can actually see the language, hear the language, and just have these subtitles. I have to say, over lockdown, I feel that my Danish and my Swedish have improved enormously from listening to various serials with the subtitles in English. What is it about that? What can we do to bring about this normalization of multilingualism? Who would like to take that? Jean.
Well, I think that one of the absolute non-negotiables has got to be languages for all in school. It's got to go back to being compulsory. Everything comes back down to that. That does not mean, Adam, that everybody must do a compulsory GCSE in it. I think that everybody should be doing languages up until school leaving age. Some will do GCSE and A-level and some won't. It can be taught at different levels and in different ways for different people. But it's got to be, as Bernadette was saying, the cultural norm, the expectation that everybody will be multilingual at some level. Nobody asks mathematicians to justify why they're doing maths or why that's important. Take up amongst 15 and 16-year-olds has halved since the dreadful cultural vandalism in 2004 made languages optional after the age of 14. And until we make it compulsory again on the curriculum until the age of 16 at least, I don't think that expectation will be rekindled. And we've gone a little bit towards that by making it mandatory in primary schools. But that's been a very good example of language policy going 2 steps forward back, because it's great for primary school children from the age of 7 have a language, but so many schools, I think about a quarter, haven't got a qualified or competent language teacher to teach it. So the delivery of that policy is really, really scrappy. It's brilliant in some places and virtually non-existent in others. And we won't get enough time on the school timetable in secondary schools ever again until it's compulsory for everybody.
Thank you, Jane. I would agree. Adam, your views on that?
Yes, no, I do agree with Jean that getting things compulsory in school is important, but that is one plank of what I would see as a wider strategy. The UK government this morning published its first integrated review of defence, security and foreign policy matters in a very long time. I'm sure many like me probably haven't had the chance to read that document yet, but I doubt that either Jean or I, or our fellow panelists, will be surprised that language learning probably doesn't feature in it as a core plank of how Britain engages with the rest of the world. I think that's a mistake. I do think we need to see our strategies very much include language and think about it for the long term as well. So the questioner who's put forward the point about media organizations playing a more proactive role, I agree completely, but that happens when there is a long-term 10, 20, 30-year strategy that both business, society and government can all get behind and try to execute together. When we flip-flop around and change policy all the time like we do in this country, that's where a lot of the big problems come in. Whether it's on language learning in school very specifically, or whether it's on, should we require public broadcasters, for example, to support an objective of multilingualism? We don't stick to policies long enough for things like that to happen, and that is one of our core failings in this area. So a more strategic and longer-term approach is very much needed.
Thank you very much, Adam. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm going to go to Janice one, because as we know, there's great evidence, isn't there, for the existence of social inequity, like the country, but also different nations. UK-wide strategy, what should we be doing now?
Actually, Bernadette, one of the comments I wanted to make on the last issue had to do precisely with this. In Scotland, for example, they had particular success working with businesses and have now introduced a qualification in languages for life and work, which is not on the sort of main academic track of hires, etc. It's something that sits outside that, and it's been so popular that it's been introduced at various different levels in Scotland, and it's something that lots of children and teenagers in the Scottish system can have access to outside the sort of mainstream qualifications. It's precisely that sort of qualification. Yes, on the differences around the UK, they are substantial, and I would say they're increasing. In the sense that, Scotland has clearly a very different education system and qualification system from the other three jurisdictions. But even in terms of qualifications and so forth, there are now quite considerable differences between Wales, England and Northern Ireland. I would say two things. One thing is that in all three devolved jurisdictions, Wales, Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, I would say there is an increased awareness of multilingualism for very obvious reasons. There are, of course, Indigenous languages in those places which are prominent, visible, and embedded in the education system in the form of Welsh, Scottish, Gaelic, and Irish. So I'd say there's quite a high awareness of multilingualism. But the other thing I would say is that the major issues that we've been talking about today around messaging, around global literacy and so forth, I think the issues there are shared right across the UK. And in the proposals that we called towards a national languages strategy that you mentioned in the introduction, Bernadette, that we published last July, very many of the major issues are shared right across the UK, but there are jurisdiction-specific details, as well. But I think some of the challenges are very much shared by all of us.
I'm going to all of you to focus on the priorities for action now, if I may. Priorities for education and skills for the UK related to languages. Jean, I'll start with you. What are you doing? What does need? Have we got Jean now?
Bernadette, your sound vanished, so I don't know what your question was.
I'm sorry. I said to everybody that I would come to you all the priorities relating to the languages education and skills, the broader skills needed for the 21st century.
Right.
So priorities for change. What can government in particular do now?
Well, I think government has got to get this strategic grip that we've all been talking about and resource an accountable national strategy across all government departments. But could I just say something about the skills? You talk about skills, and we all talk about language skills. Skills, yes, knowledge, yes, but my plea looking forward to education in the 21st century is don't let education become just training. I think education must also be about pleasure, the thirst for knowledge, about creative thinking and problem solving. And languages, learning another languages gives you all of that. And so I would hope that, you know, that people can develop a broader sense of how beneficial and how pleasurable learning another language is, as well as making them more employable.
Thank you, absolutely. And of course, high culture does preserve the universities. I mean, I think if you talk to the business world, they are very of having to understand and wanting to understand wider cultural issues, because that is often the way in to building those sustainable relationships, breakthroughs that may be just straightforward transactional, cannot. Adam, perhaps I should come to you next.
No, I completely agree. Languages do break down those boundaries, and they are so critically important. I think, just in the interests of time this evening, I just go back to the point that I was making previously. A long-term view where we plan strategically for what a globally active and globally engaged Britain looks like, and what that means for our businesses, for our people, for our education system, is extraordinarily important. And within that, I'm confident that if we get it right, language learning and cultural competence, as we've been talking about this evening, can be one of the core levers of our future success. And it's not just people who are panelists on this debate tonight that need to make that happen. We need to make that argument resonate far more widely than we do. We talk to each other sometimes. We need to be talking to our society as a whole.
Thank you, couldn't agree more. Janice?
So simply to add to what Adam and Baroness Cousins have said, I agree entirely with them, is that we need to transform the messaging around languages at every level, completely transform the messages that are going in particular to young people around languages, and also that we need to value the languages we have in our society, so the home languages of many people right across the UK, whether those are community languages or Indigenous languages. We need to value them at home and in employment.
Thank you, Janice. And finally, Charles, the voice of the younger generation. What do we need for our future?
Well, I'm not that young, but yes, I think I agree with everything that all the panelists have said. And I think that definitely what is coming through is that sort of the government really needs to sort of play a little bit of catch up. I think the younger generation already see themselves as sort of globally connected, globally mobile. So it's up to government to really fulfill that promise and to sort of enable that. This is a generation that has always had the internet, so they've been sort of very, very connected all throughout their lives. So definitely I think government needs to play catch up, and of course, mainly because I think we need a new vision, we need new ideas, and this is the only way it's going to get done. It needs to be through those different connections, through those things which haven't been seen up until this point. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. We are running time. I hope all of you have been inspired by what our panel has been sharing. And there have been a number of challenges to us all. We're all part of this change. We need to be the change, demonstrated. But it can't just be something that's in closer on the panel. Responsibility of us all, the mindset. If we talk about global, we're talking about a global mind. We're talking about international experience, the ability to reach out and connect to other people using their languages, just relying alone. And that would be the case for other world languages. All of the languages are important, and we need to value languages and culture as the proxy to becoming culturally literate, to becoming culturally agile. Terribly. So languages as a gateway to global Britain. And in that, there's this quest for international experience, be it virtual, and let's hope it will soon be real again. International experience for school children, international experience for university. Different projects, different mechanisms connect people at all moments of their working life and across the lifespan. We need to connect. And languages are at the heart of that. They are what make us individual, what make us connect and make us human. Thank you so much this evening. Wherever you are, bonsoir. Keep connected to us. Tell us what you're thinking, and let's really make that change happen. Thank you so much to the Institut Français for all of the work that you have done to enable this evening. Thank you so much to our excellent panel, Lady Cousins, Adam Marshall, Janice Carruthers, and Charles. Thank you much. Good night.